Hey guys, this is Jalen Smith. It's me in the flesh, and this is a mental health minute. And today I will be reading my first of three in the Be Anxious for Nothing series books. Now, I don't physically have the book in front of me because the order didn't come in, but since I wrote the book, I actually have the manuscript, so that's just as good. Anyway, I wanted to just kind of go over what we've done just to recap. Last week, I read The Pattern for Rejection. The week before that, I read Eat, Watch, Leave. So I basically read them in the opposite order of how they were written and created. I saved Be Anxious for Nothing for last simply because it is the start of the franchise, and I wanted you guys to get that book kind of as the most recent thing that I go through. Then next week, we'll go back into our regular schedules of doing a shorter version of the Mental Health Minute. Now, I am going to be reading from like the preface area, chapter one area of Be Anxious for Nothing, partly because there is so much content in there. It's very heavy, but it's good stuff and definitely something that I encourage those of you who haven't to read. What I will say is that Be Anxious for Nothing is really the starting point, and it really defines more of what it is that I'm called to do and what my purpose is in the gospel. And so I think that it's the most important to me. I appreciate this book as the launch pad, really, for what my purpose was in the gospel. And I'm very grateful that I was able to write through what I had experienced and able to share that with you. I want to be clear that, again, it's about anxiety, depression in the church and bridging that gap and closing it so that we're able to, in the church, understand our role in taking care of and managing our mental health symptoms and also in the recovery process. And I'm really passionate about that. I do stand as an advocate for those of us who are suffering with mental health and are saved, because a lot of what we're hearing is you need to pray more and God will heal you and deliver you from all of what you're experiencing as it deals with mental health. Prayer is always warranted. You should always continue to pray, seek God's face, but at the same time, you should be wise and seek wise counsel. And if you are not um, experiencing any relief from your symptoms, then maybe time to go see someone and get some help. I'm always an advocate for going to a therapist to have that discussion. And therapists, despite popular belief, do not want you on medication. Nobody wants you on medication. If medication is something that you and your therapist are discussing, it's generally after a long discussion with the therapist, a few visits, and really an understanding of how severe your symptoms may or may not be. If you go to a therapist on day one and they're like, let's just put you on Xanax, that's just not a good therapist. You need to go somewhere where the main goal is to uncover the why, uncover the reason, the root cause for why you're experiencing the symptoms, and then give you tools to continue to work towards a positive mental health goal. Have I been on medication? Absolutely. I have, and I have no shame in that. It was hard to even balance that out because of the transition process. You basically are dealing with a trial and error period where you find out what dosage works for you and which dosage does not. And that dosing process is not fun. But at the end of that process, if you're committed to a positive mental health journey, you really can find something that gives you that balance in your mind without taking away who you are. I just think it's just something we need to be really talking about. And I think that people don't understand that healing comes a lot of ways. And sometimes healing is a process. So you have to continuously focus on it. Just like people who have high blood pressure may or may not need to take medication, may just need to change their eating habits, how they manage their own lives. It's the same exact process for mental health. And we really need to stop making mental health this giant thing when it's really something that is extremely common, extremely treatable with diet, exercise, and sometimes medication if it's severe enough, just like any other maintenance issue. So I'm going to read from the book because I want you guys to get that excerpt. I promise it to you. I won't show you the book, but I will maybe put it up on the screen so you guys can see what the cover looks like. And of course, The link to the book will be in the description below. While we're on the description below, just go ahead and put that out there. You probably should subscribe if you have not already. The button is just right there. I'm just saying, if you just press it, like, you'll be really happy with what you did, because you're subscribed to stuff right now that you're probably not watching, but I feel like you'll watch me because you've already, come here to see what the fuss is about. So I really want you to be encouraged. If you are struggling with mental health issues, comment, because it's something that we really need to be doing as a community. Christ created the framework for the church in such a way that it really is designed to be a positive place for people suffering with mental health issues. If it's just about being present, then we have that down. We just really need to be more intent and purposeful in our behaviors with each other for the gospel. Like, we're not doing it on accident, that we're actively looking to continue to build each other up. Yeah, this is why I don't wear lipstick, just in case y'all were wondering. Anyway, sorry about all that, but definitely want to continue to lift each other up. And this is what this book is about. It's about having the conversation, opening up, and being honest and true about what the word says to us, not just about our condition, but about our lives and how the gospel plays a role in our mental health, whether we wanted to admit it or not. So, without further ado, I'm just going to read a little bit from the book. Don't know when I'm going to stop, but I'll stop when I'm ready to stop, and then we'll talk a little bit later. It says, we worry about how a person's various illnesses will affect his or her ability to be effective. But for years, we've seen the Bible bypass personal limitation without minimizing any level of contribution to God's will. God used the elderly to fulfill his promises, the barren, those slow to speak, and all for his glory. Knowing your area of weakness is not a call to sit down until you are healed, but it is a great opportunity to die to ourselves in the wake of God's deity and ability to move mountains. I had a difficult time writing this book, not because of the context. I didn't find the subject matter difficult to break down. I didn't feel at any moment that God did not call or qualify me to be a voice in the church to those that are often silent. I had difficulty simply because I have anxiety disorder. Because writing this book triggered some anxiety attacks. But God be praised that even if it took me twice as long to get to the place where I could give wings to the vision, God will still be glorified. That's the goal here, to glorify God by giving a voice to the voiceless and by bringing his light into a dark place. Before we talk about bridging the gap, we have to give the facts. We cannot just give voice to an undetermined amount of individuals. Most people who are not struggling with or do not know anyone personally struggling with mental illness may not even believe there's an issue. That's mostly because those forms of mental illness lead to a withdrawal from family and friends. People who struggle with mental illness often hide their symptoms from others. According to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the U.S., affecting 40 million adults in the United States age 18 or older and 18% of the population. Anxiety disorders cost the U.S. more than $42 billion a year, almost one-third of the country's $148 billion total mental health bill, according to the economic burden of anxiety disorders, a study commissioned by the ADAA. More than $22.4 billion of those costs are associated with the repeated use of healthcare services. People with anxiety disorders seek relief for symptoms that mimic physical illnesses. People with anxiety disorder are 3 to 5 more times likely to go to the doctor and 6 times more likely to be hospitalized for psychiatric disorders than those who do not suffer from anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders develop from a complex set of risk factors, including genetics, brain chemistry, personality, and life events. It is not uncommon for someone with an anxiety disorder to also suffer from depression or vice versa. Nearly one-half of those diagnosed with depression are also diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. I'm going to skip the numbers for you because you definitely want to read them in the book. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go and move actual statistics, the numbers, the types of disorders, and I'm going to move to the part where it talks about related illnesses. Many people with an anxiety disorder also have a co-occurring disorder or physical illness, which can make their symptoms worse and recovery more difficult. It's essential to be treated for both disorders. Once we have a basic understanding of how many people in the United States are potentially affected by some type of depression or anxiety or a combination of such, we then need to ask how many people in the U.S. are Christian. Multiple sources say that although the number is sadly on the decline, it's roughly between 70 and 71%. Now let's do some math. If 40 million adults over the age of 18 have been diagnosed with some form of anxiety disorder or depression, this number does not include adolescents and adults who have not received a formal diagnosis, and 70.5% of the U.S. is Christian, then how many Christians suffer with some form of anxiety or depression? The answer to that is 28.2 million. Let me say that again. 28.2 million adult Christians suffer from some form of anxiety disorder or depression. That is an astounding number, and yet, with all of the programs and ministries I've heard of in my lifetime, only one addressed mental illness. Now, to be fair, the math I did was very basic, and there is definitely a possible variance, but seriously, the possibility of 28.2 million Christian adults who are not having a conversation about mental illness whatsoever. 28.2 million minus 1. I want to remind you that there are many other forms of mental illness, and this is only a small discussion for a much larger topic. Whatever mental illness you are struggling with, even if it was not mentioned in this book, should be open for discussion. There should not be an off-limits portion of our walk with Christ. There's this overwhelming and universal silence about matters of the mind, and I'm here to shake things up. It's what I've always done and what I will always do. We have a serious communication problem in our churches. How many people do you know right now outside of your circle who suffer or have suffered with some of the issues I mentioned on the onset of this chapter? Take your time. I'll wait. If you have or have experienced one or more of these illnesses, who did you tell? Did you tell your pastor or a trusted teacher? Did you walk over to the new member and let them know you had clinical depression? Probably not. Who would? Your anxiety is generally personal. It's not that you aren't open to discuss it. It seemingly never comes up. The argument, however, is that it should. If this many people exist with similar issues, why aren't we having the conversations? That's what we're going to talk about, because there are several things that cause this disconnect in the church with how we address mental illness. Some of it's ignorance. People just do not have the knowledge that anyone is struggling with anything. Generally, people with anxiety, depression treat it as a coping mechanism. Some of us, it's a lack of understanding about mental health and how the word addresses it. We have this thought that if the Bible doesn't expressly list it, then we simply have to pray and God will give us some magical formula or just make the issue disappear. Now, I'm not saying God can't do that, but based on historical data, it's not likely. What we have in the absence of the words mental illness etched in the tablets right under the Ten Commandments are basic principles. We have how God commanded us to treat each other. We have the gospel. I think it was Francis Chan who asked in a video if we could describe the church using only the Bible. That question brought me to a variety of answers, but all of them expressed a collective. The church isn't just me, it's us. And we have a duty to each other. If you feel as though the issues that plague me only plague me, then you've missed the point. Understanding mental illness is everyone's concern. It's our concern because the gospel is holistic. Every person, every issue should be our concern. So that is a little bit of the preface and into the first chapter of the book. There is a lot of information and data that is in there that I did skip, and that's because it is lengthy, and I wanted you to be able to get the gist of what the actual context of the book and my writing was. Those statistics are available on Psychology Today, and I believe that actually list where they're found in the book and link that information in the back so that you know where you can get the most up-to-date information on mental health and mental illness. And I do mention and put some statistics in there for other disorders aside from anxiety disorder and depression. I use those primarily because those are my two primary and most recognizable mental health issues. But I do also have other mental health issues that are connected to those that I do mention in the book, along with the discussions that we have each week in the Mental Health Minute. So I encourage you all to stay subscribed and keep watching because there's a lot of information about other disorders that will come up. I'll describe what they're like, how they, play into your anxiety disorder and depression, and really just to have the general discussion about what can you do when you're in a position where you're saved, you're praying, you're reading, you're fasting, you're studying, and you're still dealing with the symptoms of your mental health issues. Like, what do you do? Because people don't want to have that conversation with you because really in all likelihood, they may not know. So this is the place where you can get to know that. The Be Anxious for Nothing book is the place where you can get to know that. The Pattern for Rejection is the place. And Eat, Watch, Leave is the place. These books are designed to give you the information that you may not have already had and incorporate the biblical principles that rest in the gospel that we just don't realize are there to help us in every area and not just the areas that we talk about the most. So until next week, please be well. Comment, let me know if there's anything that you want to discuss, if you have questions on, and I'm glad to bring that information up and try and incorporate it into any future Mental Health Minute segments. But until then, again, be well, stay out of trouble, and I will see you next